When a mysterious attacker disrupted a packed movie screening, the entire cinema froze, until Keanu Reeves instinctively stepped in front of Sandra Bullock, shielding her from danger. In that stunned silence, he turned a normal night out into a real-life action scene, calmly confronting the threat while keeping her close and protected. What began as a simple movie date became a powerful reminder that real heroes don't need scripts or cameras to act. I was there the night the cinema fell silent, not because of the movie on the screen, but because of what happened in the dark between the seats. I'd almost skipped the screening. It was a small old theater in downtown Los Angeles, the kind where the carpet still smelled faintly of popcorn from the 90s, and the seats creaked whenever someone breathed too hard. I'd had a rough week, the kind that makes you question if anything in your life is really moving forward, and a late-night movie felt like just another way to waste time. But a friend had called, whispering like it was a secret mission. "Come on, they say Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock might show up for a surprise cue, and you can't miss that." So I dragged myself out, more out of habit than excitement, not knowing that this tired little decision was about to sit right next to the biggest moment I'd ever witness. By the time I got there, the lobby was buzzing with that low electric hum people only get when they think something special might happen. The poster for their old movie glowed under cheap yellow lights, edges curled, the kind of thing most people would walk past without noticing. But tonight, people were taking pictures with it like it was an old friend. I found a seat near the middle, right on the aisle, the perfect spot for someone who half expected to get bored and leave early. Instead, every second would glue me to that chair. They slipped in without any grand announcement. No fanfare, no dramatic spotlight, just a quiet ripple through the crowd as heads turned and whispers swelled. Keanu and Sandra walked down the side stairs like they were just two more people trying not to block the view. He wore a worn leather jacket and simple black shirt, hair a little messy, the way you'd expect from a guy who ran late because he held the door for someone. She looked relaxed in jeans and a soft white top, hair loose around her shoulders, smiling with the kind of warmth that made the room feel smaller and safer all at once. What struck me first wasn't that they were famous, it was how they moved. Keanu paused to let an elderly couple step past him, one hand lightly touching the railing as if he was more worried about them tripping than about being recognized. Sandra thanked the usher by name after glancing at his badge, and he blushed so hard you could see it even in the dim light. They weren't performing kindness, they were just kind. It was disarming. It made everyone around them stand a little taller, speak a little softer, like we'd all silently agreed not to ruin the moment. They took their seats a few rows ahead of me, off to the side, trying to blend in. It didn't work, of course. The air changed around them, but not with the usual loud excitement you see in videos. This felt more like reverence, like everyone quietly decided not to swarm them and instead just be grateful to breathe the same popcorn-heavy air. My problems from earlier that day didn't go away, but they felt smaller, like someone had turned down the volume on my own misery. The lights dimmed, the chatter softened, and the trailers rolled. For a few minutes, we were all just movie people again. On the screen, explosions, chase scenes, dramatic speeches. In the seats, shifting legs, whispered jokes, the rustle of candy wrappers. I could see the edge of Keanu's profile, the way he leaned forward just a little when a stunt came on, like he still cared about the craft after all these years. Sandra laughed at a cheesy line in one of the trailers, then covered her mouth like she didn't want to be the loudest one in the room. It felt strangely intimate, like watching your heroes forget they're heroes and just be human. That was when I first noticed him, the man 3 rows down from them on the opposite side of the aisle. At first he blended in, dark hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, slouched in his seat. Nothing unusual in a late-night screening. But every time the screen flashed bright, I caught the edge of his face, tight and restless, eyes not really watching the movie. He kept adjusting something under his jacket, fingers twitching, leg bouncing so hard the seat in front of him shook. The people around him threw annoyed glances his way, but he didn't seem to notice or care. The movie started, and the familiar rush of action filled the room. On screen, a younger Keanu and Sandra raced against time, swerving through chaos with impossible calm. The audience cheered softly at their first appearance, a wave of nostalgia washing over us. I watched the real Keanu smile a little at his younger self, almost embarrassed, like he was watching an old home video in front of strangers. Sandra leaned over and said something to him, and they both laughed quietly, sharing a private joke that never reached us. But down the aisle, that man in the hoodie kept shifting. He looked back toward the entrance more than once, eyes darting like he was waiting for someone or something. At one point, he stood halfway up as if to leave, then sank back down, hands clenched into fists. The flickering light from the screen made his face look sharp and haunted. My stomach tightened, even though I couldn't explain why. It was just a feeling, that heavy, nameless sense that something in the room was slightly off. Like a painting tilted just enough to bother you, but not enough to prove it to anyone else. About halfway through the movie, just as the tension on screen hit one of its biggest peaks, the projector stuttered. The image jerked, froze for a heartbeat, then snapped back. A murmur went through the crowd, that collective groan people do when they think technical problems might ruin the night. Somewhere behind us, a door opened and closed quickly, a small sound almost swallowed by the surround sound. The man in the hoodie straightened in his seat, suddenly alert, reaching again under his jacket with a movement that was far too quick, far too intent to ignore. I saw Keanu notice it first. He didn't stand up, didn't shout, didn't make a scene. He just went completely still. His shoulders squared, jaw tightening slightly, eyes narrowing in the dim light. Sandra followed his gaze, frowning in confusion, then her expression shifted, first to concern, then to something closer to fear. She placed one hand lightly on his arm, as if asking silently, "Do you see this too, or is it just me?" The projector flickered again, and the sound dipped for a single eerie second. In that pocket of almost silence, the man in the hoodie pushed himself to his feet, the aisle space suddenly too narrow for how fast he was moving. Someone near him gasped. A soda hit the floor and rolled, the fizzing louder than it should have been in the dark. He reached into his jacket and pulled something out, his arm lifting, his posture coiling like he was about to do something none of us were ready for. Keanu moved before anyone else. In one fluid motion, he pulled Sandra closer, his arm wrapping protectively around her shoulders as he rose from his seat. He stepped slightly in front of her, body angled toward the aisle, eyes locked on the man in the hoodie like there was no one else in that theater. Time didn't slow down, but my breath did. Every sound, the buzzing exit sign, the distant rumble of the movie, the soft rustle of shifting clothes, faded under the weight of one single, terrifying question. And as the entire cinema hung there in that fragile, breathless instant, I watched Keanu take one steady step forward, shielding Sandra with his body, his hand outstretched toward the darkness, just as the object in the stranger's hand finally caught the light. It wasn't a phone or a wallet in his hand. Under the flicker of the screen, the object looked heavy and dark, with edges that caught the light in a way that made every muscle in my body lock. It wasn't clearly anything, but it was just close enough to the shape of a weapon that my brain filled in the worst possibilities in a single heartbeat. Around me, I heard sharp breaths, seats creaking, someone whispering, "Oh my God," like a prayer they'd just remembered. The man in the hoodie swung around, his chest heaving, eyes wide and unfocused. People nearest to him shrank back, pulling their knees up, ducking their heads. One guy dove out of his seat and crawled toward the aisle, spilling popcorn that skittered across the floor like tiny marbles. Somewhere in the back, a woman started sobbing. The movie kept playing on the screen, explosions and music crashing over us, but it felt wrong now, like background noise from another planet. Keanu didn't step aside or sit down or wait for someone in uniform. He stayed standing in the dim aisle light, body angled between the stranger and Sandra. His arm was still around her shoulders, firm but gentle, like he was telling her without words, "I've got you." She gripped his jacket with one hand, fingers pressed into the worn leather, her eyes never leaving the object in the man's fist. I could see she was scared, her breath came shallow, her lips parted, but she didn't pull him back. She let him stand in front of her, and that choice alone said something about her courage. "Hey," Keanu said, voice low but somehow cutting through the noise. It wasn't the booming movie voice everyone imitates. It was calmer, rough around the edges, human. "My friend, look at me, okay? Just me." The man's head jerked toward him. "Don't come closer," he snapped, holding the object higher. "You don't know what they did, none of you know." His hand was shaking so badly I could hear the metal or plastic or whatever it was click softly against his rings. Panic rolled through the audience like a wave. A couple of people bolted for the exits, their shoes pounding down the steps. Others froze, eyes wide, trapped between fear and disbelief. You're right, Keanu answered, taking half a step forward anyway. I don't know, not yet, but I want to. We can talk, man. No one here wants to hurt you. His tone was steady, but from where I sat, I could see a tiny pulse jumping at his temple, the honest tremor of a man who understood this could go very wrong, very fast. Sandra's other hand slid to the middle of his back, fingers spreading like she was grounding herself through him, and maybe grounding him too. Talking doesn't fix anything, the man spat. They cut me out like I was nothing. Years of my life gone, you just kept going, all of you just kept going. There was something broken in his voice, something more desperate than hateful. For the first time, I saw the wet shine in his eyes. This wasn't a cartoon villain. This was somebody who'd been carrying a weight alone for far too long and had finally snapped under it. Keanu's brows pulled together. Whatever happened to you, that matters, he said. You matter, but this, he nodded at the thing in the man's hand. This isn't the way you want us to remember you. One moment doesn't have to define your whole life. The stranger's laugh came out jagged, halfway to a sob. Maybe I don't want a whole life. Maybe I just want one moment where somebody finally pays attention. His grip tightened. As he said it, his thumb slid over a small raised piece on the side of the device, something that looked exactly like a button. A tiny red light blinked awake under his hand, glowing in the dark like a warning none of us knew how to read. The red light was no bigger than a pinhead, but the second it flashed, the room changed. People ducked below the seats, arms over their heads, instincts taking over before logic could catch up. A guy near the front grabbed his girlfriend and pulled her down, spilling her drink all over both of them. Someone shouted for everyone to run, but there weren't enough aisles, or enough time, or enough air. Fear made the theater feel much smaller than it had a few minutes before. Keanu didn't flinch. If anything, he became even more still, like moving too fast might snap a fragile wire holding the moment together. Hey, hey, he said, louder now but still strangely gentle. Look at me, not at them, not at the exits, just me. His voice carried in a way the surround sound didn't, slicing through the chaos like a single clear note. Sandra stayed right behind him, pressed so close I could see her chest rise and fall against his back. But when he took another slow step forward, she didn't hold him back. She just whispered, barely audible, "Please, be careful." And somehow that tiny plea made the whole thing feel even more real. The man's eyes were shining now, not just with fury but with something more fragile, shame, maybe, or the terror of realizing he'd stepped onto a ledge he didn't know how to climb down from. You don't get it, he said, voice breaking. I gave everything to this industry, background work, stunts, anything. I was in your movie, I was there, and they cut my scene. My family never believed I was part of it. They laughed when I told them. Do you know what that feels like? To be invisible in the one thing that was supposed to prove you existed. Keanu's shoulders softened a fraction. He nodded slowly, like he was absorbing each word instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. I know what it's like to lose things you thought would always be there, he said quietly. People, roles, whole futures. There was a heaviness in his tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Everyone knew the stories about the losses he'd lived through, the heartbreaks that tabloid headlines never fully captured. Hearing him hint at them now, in this dark room, made the distance between us and him shrink down to almost nothing. But hurting people won't bring that scene back. It won't make them sorry in the way you want. It'll just add one more pain to a world already full of them. The man swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. The red light still glowed under his thumb. You have no idea how long I waited for a night like this, he whispered. I thought if you had to see me, really see me, you'd finally understand what you took from me. His voice caught. I didn't come here to kill anyone. I needed you to feel scared the way I've been scared, all the time. Sandra stepped out from fully behind Keanu then, just enough that the man could see her face. Her eyes were glassy, but her gaze was steady. What's your name? She asked softly. He looked thrown by the question. W what? Your name, she repeated. Not extra, not background, not the guy they cut. Your real name. He hesitated, then forced it out. Evan. Evan, she said like she was trying it on, making room for it. I'm Sandra. That's Keanu. You were never nothing, Evan. They didn't cut you. They cut a moment on a timeline because of schedules or pacing or 1,000 things that have nothing to do with your worth as a person. She took in a shaky breath. But right now, you're about to trade the rest of your life for 5 minutes of being noticed. And I promise you that is not a fair deal. Evan's face crumpled like a paper cup. His arm dropped a few inches, the object sagging in his hand. The red light kept blinking. I didn't even make it real, he choked out. It's just batteries and wires and some metal I glued together. I'm not. His gaze flicked around at the terrified faces peeking over seats, and he winced. I just wanted you to believe I could do something big for once. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Keanu nodded again, the tension in the room shifting, not gone but changed into something almost unbearable in a different way. Okay, he said quietly. Then let's make your big moment about something better than fear. Can I see it? He held out his hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. From my seat, I could see Evan's fingers trembling around the fake device, knuckles white, veins standing out under his skin. This was the edge he was standing on, the thin line between becoming a headline and becoming a human being again. His breathing was ragged, his eyes shining with panic and a grief that had clearly been waiting years for a place to spill out. Slowly, like his arm weighed 100 pounds, he lifted the object. Everyone in the theater held their breath as he stared at Keanu's outstretched hand, then at Sandra's tear-filled eyes behind him. For a heartbeat, I thought he might pull back, might hit the button anyway just to prove that he could. Instead, with a broken sound somewhere between a sob and a sigh, Evan placed the device in Keanu's palm. And the second he let go, his shoulders collapsed, like the only thing holding him upright had finally been taken away. Up close, the thing in Keanu's hand looked even more terrifying, all taped wires and jagged metal, the red light still pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't wave it around or try to play hero. He kept his arm low and steady, fingers gently cradling it as if it might fall apart, or actually go off if he squeezed too hard. With his other hand, he made a calming motion to the crowd, a small circle in the air like he was telling us, breathe. Just breathe. Okay, Evan, he said, eyes never leaving the device. I'm going to turn this off now, yeah? His thumb moved slowly along the side, searching. For a second that felt like a full minute, nothing happened. Then there was a tiny click, barely audible over the distant roar of the movie's car chase, and the red light went dark. The change in the room was almost physical. You could feel lungs expanding again, shoulders dropping an inch, the fragile return of oxygen to a starving space. Before anyone could fully process the relief, the exit doors at the back of the theater burst open. Flashlights cut through the darkness, harsh and white, slicing across faces and seats. Hands where we can see them, nobody move. Security and 2 police officers poured in, guns drawn, voices sharp with urgency. Whatever calm had just begun to grow was ripped away in an instant. People threw their hands up, some crying again, some cursing under their breath. More than one person pointed straight at Evan. Evan flinched, his eyes going wide all over again. The brief, fragile softness in his expression snapped back into terror. He looked from the officers to the fake bomb now resting in Keanu's palm, and I could see the realization hit him. Even if it was fake, the consequences were about to be very real. His breath came in shallow gasps. I'm sorry, he stammered, voice shaking. I was. His knees buckled a little, but he stayed upright through sheer panic. Set it down, one of the officers shouted to Keanu, their voice echoing off the walls. Sir, set that device on the ground and step away. Now. Keanu immediately did as he was told. He crouched slowly, gently placing the fake explosive on the empty seat beside him, spreading his fingers to show he was letting go. Then he straightened, hands lifted slightly, palms empty. He wasn't trying to be the center of the scene. If anything, his posture said, let's get everyone out of this alive. Sandra kept close behind him, one hand still on his back, but she lifted her other hand too, making sure the officers saw she wasn't a threat either. It's fake, Keanu called out, voice firm but respectful. It's not a real bomb, no explosives, just props and wires. He's scared, that's all. Nobody's been hurt. His words hung there, caught between the tension of procedure and the need to believe him. Everyone stay seated, the other officer barked, moving cautiously down the aisle, gun still trained in Evan's direction. You, he nodded at Evan, drop to your knees, hands behind your head, do it slowly. For a second, Evan didn't move. Shock had frozen him. His eyes flicked to the device, to the officers, to the dozens of faces watching him. In those eyes, I saw a terrible mix of anger and fear, but also, surprisingly, pity. Some people looked ready to condemn him to whatever came next. Others just looked like they wanted someone to reach him before he shattered completely. Evan, Sandra said softly, taking one careful step to the side so he could see her more clearly. Her voice trembled, but her gaze stayed steady. Please listen to them. Don't make this worse for yourself. We know it's not real. You gave it up. That matters. Let that be the good part of this story." His lower lip shook. "I didn't mean," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Then, as if her words had cut through the panic fogging his brain, he slowly sank to his knees. His hands rose above his head, fingers splayed, trembling so violently I could see it even from several rows back. One of the officers advanced, cuff at the ready, eyes still wary. The device sat harmlessly on the seat between them, a pathetic, ugly little pile of pretend danger that had nearly turned a whole theater into a tragedy. For a heartbeat, everything balanced on a knife edge, procedure versus compassion, fear versus understanding. And as the officer reached for Evan's wrists, he looked up at Keanu with eyes full of dread and something even deeper. "Once they take me," he said hoarsely, his voice cracking in the dark. "That's it, right? I go back to being nobody, just the crazy guy from the news, invisible again, but worse." The question hovered there, heavy and desperate, as the cold metal of the handcuffs closed around his wrists with a final, echoing click. For a long second, nobody answered him. The only sounds were the soft rattle of the handcuffs and the distant rumble of the movie still rolling on the screen, playing out a scripted crisis, while we stood in the middle of a very real, unscripted one. The officer started to guide Evan to his feet, grip firm on his arm, but Keanu stepped forward, stopping just at the edge of what the cops would tolerate. "Officer," he said calmly, voice low but carrying, "please, one moment." The younger cop nearest him bristled. "Sir, we need you to step back and return to your seat." Keanu didn't move. He didn't raise his voice, didn't throw his status around. He simply held the officer's gaze with a steady, unflinching look. "I understand you have to do your job," he said, "and I respect that, but this man surrendered. The device is fake. Everyone here just saw him choose not to hurt anyone. That choice should count for something." The older officer, the one who'd been quieter, eyes scanning everything with the practiced exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many bad nights, studied Keanu for a moment. Then he glanced at the shaking figure of Evan, at the harmless prop on the seat, at the terrified, exhausted faces all around. The barrel of his gun dipped a few inches, not holstered yet, but no longer aimed like a promise. "We still have to take him in," the older cop said, voice more measured now. "Threats, panic like this, there are consequences." "I know," Keanu replied. "I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you not to let this be the end of his story." He turned his head slightly, looking at Evan, then back at the officer. "He needs help, real help, not just a cell and a headline." Sandra stepped forward, her fear now threaded with a quiet, determined strength. "He terrified us," she admitted, glancing around the room, but he also stopped. He listened. He handed over the device. "No one here wants to see this turn into another broken life if it doesn't have to." She looked toward the audience then, voice soft but clear. "If you don't want to press charges for yourselves, if you're willing to let this be handled as a mental health crisis first, raise your hand." It was a risk. Nobody had to participate. They could have sat on their hands, justified in their anger and fear. But slowly, one by one, hands began to lift in the dim light. The couple in front of me, the guy who'd crawled down the aisle earlier, the woman who'd been sobbing behind us. An older man near the front stood up entirely, hand over his heart, nodding silently. Within seconds, more than half the theater had their hands raised, not in surrender now, but in a strange, fragile kind of collective mercy. I realized my own arm was in the air before I'd consciously decided to lift it. The older officer watched all of this, his jaw working. Finally, he exhaled, long and slow, the fight draining from his shoulders. He nodded once. "All right," he said. "We'll note that in the report, no individual complaints from the audience." He looked at Evan, who was staring at the raised hands with utter disbelief. "You're still coming with us," he added, matter of fact, but not cruel. "You'll talk to someone, a lot of someones. But maybe this doesn't have to ruin what's left of your life if you're willing to do the work." Evan's face twisted like he didn't know whether to sob or laugh. "Why?" he rasped, looking between the officers, the crowd, and finally back at Keanu and Sandra. "Why are you all being kind? I scared you. I lied to you. I made you think you were going to die." Keanu stepped closer, dropping to one knee so he was level with Evan's cuffed hands. The officers tensed but didn't stop him. Up close, there was no movie star distance, just a tired man looking into the eyes of another tired man. Because someone once looked at me when I thought I'd lost everything, he said quietly, and they chose to see a person instead of a problem. That choice saved my life in ways I didn't understand until years later. I can't fix what you've done tonight, Evan. I can't promise there won't be consequences. But I can refuse to let this moment define you as a monster when what I see is a human being in a lot of pain. Tears spilled over Evan's cheeks. He ducked his head, his voice barely audible. I just wanted to be seen. You were, Sandra said gently. You are. But next time you want to be seen, try showing someone your work or your story or your kindness instead of your fear. It lasts longer. She gave him a small, sad smile. And it hurts a lot fewer people on the way. The officers guided Evan toward the exit more carefully now, not dragging him but walking with him. As he passed our row, he looked out at all of us, eyes red and stunned. Nobody cheered, nobody booed. Some people nodded at him. One woman whispered, "Get help," under her breath, and I saw him flinch at the word, then slowly nod. When the doors closed behind them, the theater was left in a heavy, charged silence. It wasn't the frozen, terrified silence from before. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when you're checking to make sure your house is still standing and your heart is still beating. The manager finally appeared at the front, pale and rattled, clutching a walkie-talkie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began awkwardly, we're going to offer refunds, of course, and..." Keanu gently took the mic from his hand. "If anyone needs to leave, please do," he said, scanning the crowd with eyes that were tired but kind. "If you're shaking, if you're triggered, if you just want to go home and hug someone, that's okay. Take care of yourselves." He paused, glancing at Sandra, who gave him a small nod. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "But if you want to stay and finish the movie, I promise the second half is a lot less interactive." A ripple of shaky laughter rolled through the room. It wasn't full or carefree, but it was real. Someone actually clapped once, then stopped, embarrassed, and that just made more of us laugh, the tension finally beginning to loosen its grip. The absurdity of it, watching a neatly scripted action sequence after surviving our own chaotic one, suddenly felt like the most human thing in the world. I stayed. Most of us did. Not because we cared about the ending of the film, but because we needed to sit with each other a little longer, to prove to ourselves that we could make it through the rest of the night without sirens and shouting. As the projector flickered back to life and younger versions of Keanu and Sandra raced across the screen, the real ones slipped quietly back into their seats. She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. He rested his hand over hers for a second, a simple, tender gesture that said more about love and loyalty than any scripted romance ever could. By the time the credits rolled, the theater felt different. People spoke softly to strangers they'd never met, offering water, tissues, awkward jokes that landed just enough to keep us from sinking. On the way out, I watched Sandra stop for a shaky young woman near the aisle, taking an extra minute to listen to her talk about panic attacks. Keanu helped an older man down the steps, one hand hovering near his elbow as if ready to catch him if he stumbled. Out in the cool night air, the city hummed on, mostly unaware of what had just happened in that aging theater. No dramatic news vans, no flashing headline yet, just a cluster of people standing together under the dim marquee, holding themselves a little straighter, hugging each other a little tighter. I realized that when I'd walked in, I'd felt invisible too, weighed down by my own disappointments, assuming nobody cared whether I showed up or not. Now I'd seen what could happen when one person dared to step forward instead of shrinking back. When, in the middle of fear, someone chose courage and kindness at the same time. On my way home, the image that stayed with me wasn't the fake bomb or the raised guns or even Evan being led away in cuffs. It was the moment Sandra asked for his name. It was Keanu kneeling on that sticky theater floor to look another human being in the eye. It was the sight of dozens of hands lifting in the dark, choosing mercy over vengeance, not because anyone earned it, but because someone had to break the cycle somewhere. The cinema fell silent that night when danger walked in, but what mattered more was how it sounded when the silence broke, with breathing, with shaky laughter, with whispered apologies and promises to do better. And if there's anything I took from that strange, terrifying, beautiful evening, it's this. You don't have to be a movie star to step in front of someone when life comes at them hard. You don't need a script to ask for a name or to say, "I see you," when the world has made them feel like an extra in their own story. Real courage isn't always loud or perfect. Sometimes it's just a frightened man standing his ground, a frightened woman choosing compassion, and a room full of strangers deciding that fear doesn't get to write the ending.